besides talking about the Campbell River, is you've got a new, I'm going to call it a feature film. It's probably has a different characterization than that, but it's a powerful film. It's about our military. It's called Forsaken Warriors, How Trudeau Broke Canada's Military. Why don't you give us about a minute intro, and then we'll play the trailer for people.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Ezra. So the film, this is one that I've been wanting to make for a while. I served a couple 3 years in the Canadian Army Reserves. I've always had a lot of fondness and passion for Canada's military. And it's really shameful how we've treated both the current crop of men and women in uniform, but also our veterans. So the film starts out first looking back in time at just how great this military was. World War I, population of 7 million. We put about 700,000 into uniform. World War II, we put over 1 million men and women into uniform. And starting in about the 60s, Pearson and then Trudeau Sr. Began the long and gradual decline that has been exponentially increased under this current government. The state of the military, we look at the state of its equipment, more than half of the Army's vehicles unusable. Country of 40 million, we maybe have 12 fighter jets that we can call up at any given time. Our Arctic is completely unguarded. And then we take a deep dive both into the treatment of our veterans and also this new almost attempt to replace the warrior culture within the CAF, within the Canadian Armed Forces, with all these bizarre new woke policies, including changes to the forces dress codes that were now partially repealed, and all sorts of accusations leveled throughout the ranks. So that's we cover everything from the state of the equipment to recruitment to retention, ability to project power abroad to protect our own sovereignty here at home, and also some of the cultural changes that have led to many people to leave, quite frankly.
Wow, that you've covered so many amazing issues there. I didn't know that you had served for 3 years in the reserves. So that's great. I mean, obviously, that gives you a deep understanding here, but I think it also speaks to your character and your service to the country. I was just reading a story the other day, I think it may have been by Cosmin Georgia at True North, about how the military is now investigating anyone who was against this bizarre decision by the Canadian Armed Forces to put tampon dispensers in men's bathrooms, that those objectors are being investigated for hate and extremism. It's just out of the corner of my eye. I think I saw a story about that. So you're so right. I mean, you want, I hate to say it, you want guys. You want men who are fit and have a sober-minded warrior mentality. It is not the place for woke experimenting. And I think that it started with Pierre Trudeau, the disrespect. It's a moral disrespect for the armed forces. And Trudeau had that for many of our institutions. And I'm so glad you remind us of the history, because that is part of our identity they're trying to raise to zero. That when you topple statues, when you topple and you rewrite history, it's because you're trying to make people forget who they are. Enough intro. Let's watch the trailer together. We're watching a trailer to Aaron Gunn's new film, Forsaken Warriors. Let's take a look.
Current and former defense officials are raising alarms about the state of the Canadian military.
Almost half of this country's military equipment is unavailable.
What is the state of Canada's forces today in your view?
It's pitiful. Current security threats going, we are woefully unprepared.
The institution has lost its way.
The Canadian Armed Forces are in a state of disrepair, of crisis.
Half of the Army's vehicles and trailers are parked against a fence because they don't have the spare parts to keep them going.
We have an Army that has no anti-aircraft capability.
The Navy is struggling to have 3 elderly frigates at sea at once. And it goes on and on and on.
It seems like every time No, it doesn't seem like it. It's absolute fact that every time the Liberals are in power, they strip away more and more of our military culture.
DEI gets people killed. It is literally the plague of the service right now.
There are certain occupations where if you don't go with meritocracy, it's dangerous.
It's blatant
partisan politics.
We're degrading operational capability because we're doing all this other stuff.
When I walk through bases, sometimes I shake my head and I got to bite my tongue.
This government is not serious about defense, which means our allies aren't happy.
We had been important. It was inconceivable that they would come together and form NATO without us being a part of it. Today, I don't think we'd ever get an invitation to the table. That reputation is going up in smoke unless we do something to turn it around.
Their treatment of the armed forces right now is appalling.
When people sacrifice and spill their blood and watch their friends blow up in front of them and the government just kind of goes, thanks for coming out, we're nothing more than a dollar, something to spend money on. If we weren't there, they'd be able to save, right?
You could come back bound to a wheelchair with no help and services for the rest of your life.
Holy smokes. Wow, that looks amazing. The first thing that stands out to me is you are talking to serious people there. I think I recognized Vice Admiral Mark Norman amongst the senior brass. I didn't quite remember the name of the fellow with the white hair who's a very senior military man. Who are some of those? I recognize Peter MacKay. I recognize David Burkeson. Tell me some of those. Peter MacKay, of course, former defense minister. This was not you just working on this in your home. You went out there and met with some of the most senior military people, very, very senior, in fact. Tell me some of the folks you talked to.
Yeah, well, it's not as I try to do with these documentaries. It's not Aaron Gunn's view of the world. It's going out to try to talk to the experts, the people that are living this, that are closest to the issues, and then bring the truth of what they know to as many Canadians as possible. So in that trailer, you would have seen, in addition to Mr. MacKay there, the former Minister of Defense, also the former military heads of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. So that's as well as Lieutenant General Maisonneuve, who I think you're referencing. You mentioned Vice Admiral Norman, who was obviously prosecuted and failed prosecution by the government. Lieutenant General Hood, former head of the Royal Canadian Air Force, and also Lieutenant General Andrew Leslie, who was the head of the Canadian Army.
That's who it was. Yeah, I recognized him there, and he used to be a Liberal MP.
A Liberal MP, the whip actually of the caucus, and he had probably the most stinging criticism for this current prime minister and their cabinet making the decisions right now around national defense. We also went down to Washington D.C., talked to the assistant deputy of defense, former very senior Pentagon official Elbridge Colby, as well as I think a deputy ambassador to Canada formerly, who's now retired, to talk about how much our international reputation has taken a hit and how we're kind of viewed, completely unseriously around the major capitals of the world.
That is the heartbreaking part. There was a time when we were, I think after World War II, I think we had the third or fourth largest Navy in the world. Canada actually once had an aircraft carrier. It's hard to believe. We had our own beach on D-Day, just like the Brits and the Yanks. We had Juno Beach. We were even there in Korea. And for a while there, while we were in decline, we still boasted. The Liberals used to boast about how we were big into peacekeeping. And you can have your opinions about peacekeeping. I sure do. But at least it was a commitment and it was a symbol. I don't even think there's any Canadian peacekeepers. I mean, there's some forces, I think, in the Baltics right now. But I don't think, and Trudeau put some folks, I think, in Mali for a year. But I actually don't think we have any peacekeepers deployed anywhere in the world right now. And that picture, there was that one image of the grown-ups, I think that was in the G7 or NATO, huddled together talking, and there was Trudeau off to the side, because I guess he had already told his cool joke about his socks, and he had already, done all the party tricks, and they'd already all seen them. So the grown-ups were talking. You sit at the kids' table, but I'm using metaphors here, but it's a fact. There's this new group called AUKUS, Australia, UK, US. We're not in it. We used to be part of the Five Eyes. It was like the Super Friends. It was like the inner circle of good guys. We're not really included in things anymore because everyone knows Justin Trudeau has allowed the Chinese government to infiltrate the highest offices of the land. That trailer alone reminds of about 10 different crises altogether. That's wow. How long's the movie?
The movie is the longest film I put together yet, but there was just so much, unfortunately, so much disaster to reveal. So I think it's just over an hour and a half. You touched on some really important points there. When it comes to AUKUS, this alliance, this both military alliance and technology sharing partnership with significant economic benefits signed between Australia, the U.S., and the United Kingdom. Not only are we not in it, we weren't even invited. I remember growing up in social studies class, Ezra, there was a lot of talk about Canada always punching above its weight in world history and on the international stage. And as Vice Admiral Mark Norman put it, in order to measure the weight or the power of the punch, you have to be in the ring. And we're not even in the ring right now. We're not even sitting at the table where these decisions are being made. And we're not a small country. I mean, we're a G7 country. Another thing that came up quite prominently when I was down in Washington interviewing senior American and international officials is there's growing talk about maybe Canada should be kicked out of the G7. If we can't pull our weight around the world, if we can't pull our weight in defense, why shouldn't another country, as Albert Colby put it to me, why should another country like South Korea be in the G7 instead? So these are conversations that are happening. Allies are frustrated. And again, even international scene aside, we can't even protect our own borders right now. We had a Chinese weather spy balloon, wherever you think. The Americans had to shoot it down for us over our own sovereign territories. That's how bad things have gone.